Right. So I'm back with my continuing lecture of the first chapter of Judith Butler's Gender Trouble. Okay, so in the previous video, I told you about this very witty pun that Judith Butler uses, encore and encore. And then she goes on to talk a little bit in the next section, which is the fourth section, in which she talks about groups, right? So how does one become a group? What should a group be constituted of? What makes a group? What makes a coalition? And she says very clearly, she says that a coalition can be self-defeating if a strict homogeneity is set as a precondition for the coalition. If you are going to have a group, and if that group is going to be predicated on the idea that everybody is going to agree on every point all the time, the group will not last very long, nor will the group grow. Because I think dissent, disagreement, argument, these are important. Departures, entries, these are important. So she says that divergence, breakage, splintering should be factored in too, because that is the only democratic way for a group to function. So she goes on to say that let incompleteness, and I love it when she says it. She says, let incompleteness be the condition that should be imposed. So if there is one precondition that a group should have, let this be the precondition of the group, that it should be incomplete. And I think that's rather lovely, because when you say that all groups should therefore be incomplete, it means that the group's identity, do you realize, is never going to be stable. It is always going to be a state of flux. People will come in, people will leave, there will be newer opinions, there will be debates, and that I think is something that we have to keep in mind. Moving on to the fifth section, this is where she talks about how identity functions as a normative ideal. Identity functions as a normative ideal, and this normative ideal is created through the sex gender desire teleology. So therefore, in a patriarchal society, if you do not have an identity that is in alignment with what patriarchy has told you, which is that if you're born male, then you must become a man and you must desire a woman. If that line is not followed, then your identity almost will not be recognized by patriarchy. This is where she also brings in another feminist theorist. So in the previous video we talked about Simone de Beauvoir and we talked about Lucy de Guerre, but here she introduces Monique Wittig. And she says that what Monique Wittig is saying, I mean, Monique Wittig, I think, is primarily in agreement with Simone de Beauvoir when she says this. Monique Wittig says that this is what she says: sex is always feminine. Sex is always feminine, men being the universal. So therefore, what Wittig seems to be saying is that sex and gender are tied to one another. She says that sex and woman are patriarchal. These are heteronormative terms. And I mean, that is fine, but then she goes on to say that these are heteronormative terms, and she therefore thinks lesbian is not a woman. Yeah, so she says a lesbian is not a woman. And why is a lesbian not a woman? Well, this is something which I think is going to make sense to you, because in the previous video I talked about the way in which the term woman functions in relation to man. So she's saying, well, if I do not establish a relationship with another man, then therefore my term as a woman is invalid. So she says I'm not a woman. So when she says that a lesbian is not a woman, what Monique Wittig is basically trying to say is that a lesbian is opting out of the heteronormative structure. The lesbian is opting out. The lesbian is saying, I don't want to have anything to do with this. And I think that is important, except for the fact that Monique Wittig then goes on to say that that makes the lesbian a person. And this is where Judith Butler again has a problem. She says, oh, wait a minute, because if you're saying that, this is what makes a lesbian a person, I'm assuming that when you're saying that the lesbian is a person, you mean to say that the lesbian is human. Well, here is the news. The whole concept of human is also some kind of a linguistic creation. And this is where she introduces the idea of the metaphysics of substance, which I think is very important. So I'll tell you what the metaphysics of substance is. And she says that, therefore, the essence of human, which, a lesbian seems to claim, can they actually claim that? Because then, of course, I'm going to ask you, okay, so great, you think you're a human, so tell me what is human. Tell me what is it that makes you human. And this is where Judith Butler uses the idea of the metaphysics of substance, and she quotes somebody else, of course. But I'm just going to read out the quotation to you. So this is what the metaphysics of substance is. The subject, the self, the individual are just so many false concepts, since they transform into substances, fictitious unities having at the start only a linguistic reality. So therefore, metaphysics of substance is basically this, is that you are creating substance. See how completely contradictory that sounds. You are creating that substance with something that is as unsubstantial as language. Because you see, there is no materiality to language, right? I mean, you can't touch the word cat, right? You can't touch the word dog. Yes, you can't touch love. You can't touch hate. You can't touch these things. So therefore, words are not substantial. But this is where the irony is that these completely unsubstantial things called words are used to create substance. Human, man, woman. So that she's saying that this linguistically produced binarizing assignment of identities, that is something which patriarchy is doing. And this is where she introduces Michel Foucault. She says that when Foucault was editing the journal of Herculine Barbin, the 19th century hermaphrodite, Foucault says something which Judith Butler initially, she just quotes, but then later on she's going to criticize it. She says that Foucault says that Herculine Barbin is the sexual impossibility of identity. Why is Herculine Barbin a sexual impossibility of identity? Because the way in which we think about sexuality is that we tie it to certain body parts. We tie it to certain body parts. We almost have a map of erogenous zones. We have a map of what is sexually exciting to us. Which parts of our body when touched is going to sexually excite, and of course the overwhelming emphasis in that map is given to our genitalia. Well, how are you going to map sexual desire on a body that is hermaphroditic? So because such kind of a mapping is impossible, Michel Foucault finds it very celebratory. We are not going to critique that at the moment. As of now, Michel Foucault finds it very celebratory. So, but Judith Butler agrees with Foucault in the sense that she says that Herculine Barbin is an example that Judith Butler is going to use, because Herculine Barbin is proof that there is no gender core. That is the point that Butler is making over here, is that there is no gender core. So if there is a gender core, then what is the gender of a hermaphrodite? How is that going to happen? So primarily that is what it is. Okay, we are going to stop here now, and then we will continue with the third and last section in the next video.